Okay. This meetup is about self-organized estimation. It's a difficult topic. We've been really planning this for 2 months, and we've been discussing it for a long time. The paper is posted in the forums if you want to take a look. It's somewhat involved. I used game theory inside the paper and some psychoanalytic terms in there as well. I don't know if anyone had any questions, if anyone had any chance to read over the paper. We can probably start there, or I can just go through the paper. It's pretty long, so what do you guys want to do?
I'm ready to share it myself. I'll share it if you want on the screen, and then you can go through. I think an overview for everyone, a quick overview would be good.
All right, so if you've been developing software for even just a couple years, you probably have seen that estimating things is really, really difficult. The reason as to why is still, I found I have not seen really good explanations on why. There are different things that people have been writing about since the 70s, all the way back to the Mythical Man Month, that try to give some type of accounting of software estimation. I found that within software, we don't really use a lot of the tools that are out there for modeling human interaction. So I tried to do that in this paper. And then there's a core argument within the description of what an estimate is. That is probably the most important part of this paper. And then we give some ideas on how to do estimation, how it was done in the past, and maybe how to do it within a distributed environment. So that's the overview. Any questions? Okay. All right. Let's go over this first portion here.
Can everyone see the screen share? You can see the screen share that I'm doing? Yeah, okay. It's not showing up on the phone, so it's hard for me to verify, but as long as it shows on the computer, I'm good. Thanks.
Okay, so these triangles that kind of illustrate that two opposing kind of forces. So there's rational estimation and irrational estimation. I think it's good to kind of always try to account for both sides. Within economics, we kind of try to do everything like as if people behave in a rational way. And then one of the things from studying game theory that's always bothered me is that it just doesn't really account for that irrational behavior properly. There are some people that try to do that within game theory, behavioral economics. They try, but I found that it seems the psychologists are better at mapping irrational behavior than the economists. So from now on, I'm just going to try to use them both a little bit more. I think in order to understand the relationship within an estimate, you have to understand a kind of a basic game within game theory called the principal agent game. Within the principal is always the person who's asking for work to be done, and the agent is the one doing the work. This is also kind of the core of what contract theory is. I have some illustrations in here, and then I have some kind of narratives, and if you guys let me know if it makes sense to you. I've tried to explain game theory in a bunch of different ways, and I'm still looking for the best way to go into it without having to do a whole introduction to game theory every time you write a paper. It tries to map the counterintuitive portion of relationships between people. People accommodate the behavior of other people whenever they make decisions, and that's what game theory is all about. So principal agents, they adjust for each other, and that's one of the core problems of an estimate. Is when you make an estimate, people adjust to it. So we've got a portion here about the principal agent. It basically will tell you, if you have a strong signal, which is somebody with good reputation, and a weak signal, and you've got managers who they may have a project that's high risk and a project that's low risk. Within game theory, there's a problem of private information or asymmetrical information, but basically what that means is one person doesn't know what the other person knows. This is important within principal agent theory, because a person that doesn't know how hard you're working, they can't monitor you. Or if they don't know how hard the problem is to do, they can't monitor you. An example would be if you have a distributor in China and you're in the United States, and they're supposed to sell your product over there. You're not there, so you don't know how much or how hard they're working. When they come back and they decided to just take the next month off, and they tell you, your product didn't sell last month, you don't know. So they have private information about how hard they worked. So that's an issue there. You don't know whether to go with a different distributor or not. That's the same problem that a project manager has with dealing within software. A project manager, let's say a traditional project manager who's not a developer, they can't tell how hard the project is for you to accomplish. It's really, there's boundaries around this thing. There can be simple projects, let's say a website, and the project manager may have had someone do a website before a couple times, so they kind of know the effort just from measuring previously how long it took for the website to get done and talking with people. So that would be a low-risk project, let's say. Let's say it's just not a high-fidelity user experience type website. It's just a landing page. That would be a situation where there's low private information there. A difficult software project would be one where, of course, the project manager is not technical. They're the principal. They're asking you to do the work, and you're the developer. If it's somewhat involved, they're asking you to do a clone of WhatsApp. It's a really difficult problem to solve, and they don't know that. It seems simple. They don't know that. but they know that they failed. Maybe people have failed before or whatever. So they can't monitor how difficult it is for you to create a system like that, a very high performance system. So there's different situations. If someone has a strong signal, that which means they have a great reputation, that matches up well with work that is difficult or risky. That's what I'm calling work that's highly asymmetrical. If someone with a great reputation, you ask them to do something like a landing page, they're overqualified. And so on one side, it may be that they do lots of extra bells and whistles for that side, and the project manager doesn't like that. And so that's kind of what we think of as overqualified. So when they do their estimates and everything like that, that's where this all becomes important. It may be that they come through and they say, okay, it's a website, it's going to be $500 an hour, and it's going to take me multiple weeks, and it's a landing page or something like that. But this person, let's just say that it's a Johnny Ives from Apple or something, and the website's going to cost you $50,000 or something like that. Because that's just how he decides to do his work. He doesn't want to put out anything that's low grade or whatever, because he's world class. The project manager is not going to like what he's done after he's done. They just wanted something simple. But he naturally will do more. He will naturally over-engineer the user experience. It's difficult for somebody that's overqualified to tone it, to pull it back. The same thing goes for developers with kind of over-architecting things on the back end. So, but within a high-risk environment, the other boundary is someone with a very low signal. Even when the project is done, there's this kind of anxiety that happens afterwards where maybe it's not good enough. And that you can, within economics, you can look at pricing theory and say someone charged too little, people are unsatisfied even though it was a good delivery. But when somebody has a weak reputation, it's kind of like the same thing. People may just want more. So those boundaries are there. So the good thing is great reputation with risk, and actually a weak signal with low risk. And those match up very well. So that's a principal agent theory, and that's what you can use for modeling relationships between someone who's asking for work to be done and someone that's doing the work. Do you guys have any questions?
I don't know if this is maybe overly focused on semantics, but you mentioned that the ability to monitor the work that's being done has to do with their ability to understand how hard something is. It just seemed a little odd. It seems like I would associate it more with, I don't know, technical competence or something. And is that supposed to be just like a proxy for that, or?
I guess so. It's about measuring. So some things are hard to measure. Another thing is let's see. I guess it is a kind of a hard concept to understand, the asymmetrical information and monitoring and all these things. We've talked about it before in environments, but or other papers. But it's really about not being able to. There's kind of like it's opaque. The person who doesn't do the work every day can't really see into the person that does the work. One way to, and I say a little bit later here, if within software, managers oftentimes come from the development side, and that behavior is most likely because those managers have about a 5-year window, if that, before they are now in the asymmetrical situation. So if you were to take a Taylor or me and take me away from programming, I can kind of tell how hard the development will be for about 5 years. And so when I'm a principal, I'm asking someone to do the work, I can see how difficult it is, and I can help with the estimate and all those types of things. But after that, it becomes a situation where essentially what I'm describing is what they call moral hazard. Somebody they're not incentivized to avoid the risk. So the agent says, I'm just going to bill you as much as possible, and you can't tell because they're putting all the risk on me as a principal. Well, if I can see into that opaqueness, then you don't want to do that. So I can go in and look at the code and say, no, just do this, But you'll see that the phenomenon is programmers that become project managers are kind of doing a short-term game where they're good for about 5 years, and then they become traditional project managers where they're not as good as a career traditional project manager. So they are kind of getting, for that 5-year period, they're getting exploited. Like they have a bunch of value that they're just giving to their principal, which is the executive that's hiring the middle manager. So they're trying to get you to really exploit yourself, but you don't realize that. I don't know if that answers your question.
I guess the thought that I had was the example you gave was you have this distributor in China and they could just not work for a month. And it doesn't seem like you have to be able to conceive of how hard something is in order to be able to have a system of accountability. And so that's not really like an analogous situation to project manager and employees in the same office, where you can at least know they're working. I mean, I guess they could be faking it, but you could assume that.
So you answered your own question. It's very easy for me to. It's very easy for me, as I've been programming for 26 years. I almost enjoy somebody to think that they know how hard something is and I'm working. That's just a game. It's like a funny little game. You live in a corporate world. It's like the good managers they know they don't know, and they want you to fix stuff. The ones that want to come in and micromanage or whatever, it's kind of like they don't know how. Yeah, it's not wise. So yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's that phenomenon you just said that happens in the corporate world. There are people who they're being paid to sit there at their desk and look at the screen and type. And in the 80s, they used to think that there are different ways of measuring how difficult coding was, and one of them was how many lines of code you're writing. And that went by the wayside, and then they did function point analysis and a bunch of other things, and it was just like, you can't do it. Writing code is kind of like writing, being an author of a book. It's harder to write less code, so you just can't tell. But the distributor thing is, somebody if I want someone, if I want to pick, it's expensive for me to pick different distributors as a principal in, China. So I don't want to go with this person who's wasting my time and I'm shipping stuff over to them and all that stuff and they're just sitting on it. So it's costing me money, but then I can't tell if they can say, oh, the market's bad this month. So how do I do that? Monitoring and all that, that's where you're trying to mitigate that.
Okay, thanks.
So I think an example that would work that's pretty simple would be building a house. People do that. Lots of people have a house built for them, and you kind of have an idea looking at your house, thinking that you're going to know how much work it's going to be, but nobody really knows. So you can kind of look at the market, but you don't know when they come in, and especially if you say build this custom wall or anything else in your house, how much actual effort it takes for that. Most people don't, and that's an easy one where at some point you're either gonna nitpick and they're gonna fool you usually, or you just have to have some type of trust, and that's why people are usually doing referrals and stuff. It's a little bit, it's easier to get referrals. The signal is easier to find if you have the money to pay. If you don't, then there's going to be a ton of house builders and everybody else. Anything like that. Painting your house, anything like that is the same thing at a simpler level. Now you do software and it becomes very hard to tell. I mean, even if you're technical on the front end, and now you come in and say, I need to know about platform building, or at a high level on the UI, like research. If you actually need UX research, like companies that have PhDs in it, the level difference, you just aren't going to be able to do it. So how do you deal with estimating and that relationship, I think, is what we're going to talk about, right? So when someone has more knowledge, you need to figure out how to negotiate and work through that. Does anyone else have questions out there? Ian, anybody? Josh?
I can attest to the house building part. But mechanic is another one. It's not quite the same thing, but
I guess it seems to me like to some degree, the market would sort itself out. Like if you have somebody that just doesn't produce, you would either be trying multiple distributors in parallel to go along with that analogy, or you would stop and try with a different distributor after feeling dissatisfied to some extent. I don't know. But I suppose one of the difficult things is you're rarely doing the same thing twice, so it's hard to actually get metrics, and it's hard to rate one project against another, so maybe that doesn't really resolve it.
Yeah, I mean, just think that you can sell, it used to be legal to sell snake oil and say that it helped you, right, that it would cure something, and it's illegal now because markets don't work. There's at some boundary. The markets actually don't work. It's just too beneficial for someone to come in, and we call that a scam, someone to come in and say, hey, try to purchase this. Oh, you don't know if it actually works. Well,
try to act to libertarian.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the libertarians that don't read, yeah.
Well, it's kind of like basic research is another example. Sometimes you have no idea if it's going to go anywhere, or what it might be long term, and so that tends to sometimes be heavily funded by the government because corporations aren't willing to there's no obvious payoff, so that's kind of good example of, you know, there are you know, similar levels of unknown information.
So they like to harvest that work that's done by government. So medical work and all these things. It's like research is going to be big time. You have no idea if someone is sitting over there and not doing anything. And, you know, it's just high rate of failure. That's exploration, and we're going to talk about that. There's not really much you could do about it, but what's funny is, you know, letting someone else do it and then you taking it. And if that's allowed, then it's, you know, you shouldn't be surprised when you see it happen.
I guess that's like authorship of a book or authorship of anything. Authoring things, software, creating stuff is hard. And people get writer's block and so on.
Yeah. The next portion is, there's two probably somewhat controversial portions of the paper. The one where there's a graphic where it says work fills the space available. This is like a continuum of scope creep, over architecture, wanting a little birdie to fly across the screen, whatever, in any way that you can imagine how things grow. Within software, there's the MVP, which has been described as anything from a sign-up form to, you know, WhatsApp or something. But the MVP tends to move towards, okay, we want something a bit more. We want this critical path. And then it turns into how much can you get, right? So that's both sides. The customer, how much money do they want to spend on a thing, and their threshold, and then the architecture and design. All of those things tend to grow to fill the space available until something, at least the incentives are lined up for that to happen. But then trying to see, so with the economists, if the incentives line up, they like it. It's yes, that's what's going to happen. On the other side, where we try to say behavior of humans, this is where I think it gets controversial. There's a portion in us that says, okay, we're going to be ethical. No one's going to do that. So that's what we verbally say, and then we see it happen. But because it's an ethical thing, we don't want to admit that it happens. So there's a little problem there, a little short circuit that allows it to go on, and I talk about that later. But more and more, you shouldn't be surprised with the fundamental concept. It's like scope creep. We've all seen it, so that's what I'm talking about here. Is there any questions? All right. I'm going to talk a little bit on the paradox of the analysis. So we personally run into this all the time. So we're talking about estimates, trying to figure out what estimates are hard. Okay, you go in and they say, tell me how hard this is, and tell me it for free. That's what a principal wants to do. They want you to say or tell them how hard a thing is and how much it's going to be. And they want it to be detailed and all that. All the incentives line up for them to want all of that. So you can't do that on large projects, but they still want it for free. So here's the thing is you need to do analysis to tell them how hard something is, and then you say, okay, we can't tell you how hard it's going to be in 4 hours. It's going to take us longer. So you need to pay us to tell you how long. And then the principal says, well, can you tell me how long it's going to tell you, take you for you to tell me how long it is? So then now you've got a little paradox, that, almost a little infinite regress. Not quite though. But how do you, it ends up being a couple things that kind of solve this. One is just, if there are people out there for that project that give detailed estimates and there's enough market out there for people doing that, they're going to expect it. If there's not, there's not. You're not going to have to do it. So you can look at large projects, government software. They expect, when they put out a request for proposal, they expect it to be detailed to the point to where if it's a $10 million project, you probably spent $1 million on obtaining that award. It's 10% of the award. So given marketing, which is part of analysis, you're going in and you're talking to all of the stakeholders and all that stuff at some agency or what have you, and putting the proposal together. Proposal managers on the government side are $40,000 a month. That's just the capability of being able to put something together that somebody wants to read. That's going. So that's not. I mean, that's just a small amount, but it really is. Lockheed, when they go after a $10 million project, or Boeing, they spend $1 million on it. So they know they can, and then the win rate for that is 30%. So they expect to win 30% of the time of everything that they go after, and it ends up working. They end up making money. They lose $1 million off of 1/3 of those projects. That's also a nice little barrier to entry for anyone that wants to play. You just can't afford to. So when somebody says, I can do that, you can't. You probably can't. You can't withstand that loss. Because what happens is you think, oh, I'm just going to not do the analysis. I'm going to give the estimate, whatever. And if you were, the best thing that can happen to you is to lose. You lost the money, the little bit that you lost with doing the analysis. If you won, your analysis is wrong, and then you're going to be hurting even more when you do get in there. So that's kind of on the big level how it goes down. On a small level, we see it with every single person that wants work done. They want to know. So, anybody have any questions?
So, I mean, that's in government, and I can kind of understand for a project that's at the $10 million scale that you would want, I don't know, something to give you confidence into introspecting into this kind of opaque problem that you're paying somebody to do. But is there some level, some threshold below which people don't mind anymore? Is there some, I don't know, does people's expectations for detail and the estimate and quality of the estimate scale up according to the value, the cost that they're expecting to pay? Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty much. Yeah, that's all market driven. Of course, if you pay attention to that type of thing, if you read the newspaper for about 2 months, you'll see somebody going to jail for some type of bribes. And on the high level, like Boeing CFO went to prison for 20 years or something like that for just offering people jobs. So that type of thing is all market driven, but there's barriers, there's ways to cheat and all this other stuff. So, all right. So we talked about the problem of analysis with the estimations. Now so that's rational. None of that was irrational. That's all people being self-interested and going after what benefits them the most. And there's irrational estimations, which is going to be a lot more, it should be a little bit controversial. Go ahead. Yeah. So what I say is, rational estimation assumes that the principal and agent both choose outcomes compatible with their own preferences. Irrational estimation is when the principal or agent chooses outcomes that are against what they consciously prefer. So there are a couple things that make that occur, and I try to dig into that here. This next paragraph here is probably the most controversial, but most important part of the paper. And it's kind of hard to understand, but the reason why it occurs is because it's hard to understand. So I'm trying to develop that. So it says basically what ends up being is that somebody, when you're doing an estimation, you internalize some type of contradiction. And because you internalize that contradiction, you have irrational behaviors. So what is the contradiction? So at first glance, if you define what an estimate is, what I say here is the estimate is a time resource quantity that is given by an agent, right? The person doing the work. That seems pretty simple, and that could be a first, go at it. But really, it's better described as a limit. So it's something that approaches, right? So an estimate, let's see here. A more developed definition, one that describes the intrinsic contradiction within an estimate, is that an estimate is a time and resource quantity that accounts for the behavior triggered by the estimate. That is to say that an estimate merely approaches true as it accommodates behavior. Right? So if we remember that work fills the amount of time given, by feature exploration over architecture, all that stuff, then the estimate must account for the fact that people will fill up the empty space left open by the estimate. So that's really the problem with the definition of estimate. Do you guys have any questions or comments?
I think a principal is going to buy into it. We're going to fill it up. But I hear you. We're talking about human behavior, not the estimate is the ideal, and then what is actually going to happen, the difference between those, right?
So I don't know if I understand what you're saying, that the principal doesn't believe what I just said. It's something that's it's like in the unconscious. It's a contradictory thing to think about limits, right? To think about, something that comes out of my mouth, someone's going to adjust to it. And so I know that, so I'm going to adjust for them or account for them adjusting to my estimate. In some senses, it's impossible to do. Like the estimate is, that's why we say, that software estimation or other things are just like super difficult to do if you have these behaviors. The principal, remember, is asymmetrical information. The principal can't see that you're over-architecting. So that's the problem with them saying, I don't buy that. They don't have a choice. They don't know what you're doing. So, and then you, as the agent, and this is something that I have a bone to pick with on the economic side. If you read the literature, they act like only the agent can do the moral hazard, but the principal can do it. The principal can do something like, say, just simply like, I'm going to hurt your reputation by, or I'm going to withhold pay because I wanted all these features. I manipulated the way that the feature was named or whatever so that there's more now. And so I can do that after the agreement was made. So you've got two risks as an agent. I can, after the agreement was made, make you bear the risk of scope creep and your own reputation. So that's moral hazard, but I can't really find that in the stuff that, when I read about economics. It's always, it acts like a hierarchy and the principal, the one that's the good guy all the time. So that's why, another reason why I think you don't see it written about oftentimes in models and stuff. But,
yeah, I've heard forever that over and over, all consultants are liars. They're going to come in and they're going to cheat you, and that's definitely. I give you a moat. I think you did, something like that. But yeah, I think that might be relate to this as far as filling up the space too, knowing that they're going to believe that you're the principal's going to, that seems to be a common belief, that the agent is going to try to cheat them. So they're going to assume, because it's opaque to them and they don't know for sure, that you're over-architecting. So then it's in their interest to keep it general enough that at the end they can come back and try to expand on what the feature actually meant.
I guess that information asymmetry produces a level of fear and distrust because they feel like there's no way for them to audit you, and that makes them, constantly on edge. Like, I could be being screwed over and there's no way I would know. It makes you feel like you're probably going to be screwed over. It's kind of like, going back to house building or mechanics. This is the classic mechanic problem. The mechanic can say, oh yeah, actually there's $1 billion of work that needs to be done on your car, and you don't know mechanics, so you have no way to audit whether he's right or wrong, and classically that gets abused.
yeah, this is true. The mechanic thing is the principal agent. You're the principal and the mechanic's agent. So that same game is over and over and over again. And depending on how much you can monitor or measure what they do, that's how much you are susceptible to the moral hazard, which is them getting you to agree, getting your car up on the lift, removing the engine, saying, oh, well, everything's messed up now. You have to pay, right? So everything that you guys are saying, when it comes to, with respect to what an estimate is and all that stuff, just remember both sides. They're scared, principal's scared, they have to do the work, but we know also that the labor also can and normally gets screwed over by the principal because of their way of manipulating contracts or what have you after the fact. So
I guess their source of power derives from them not paying unless they find the work satisfactory at a fundamental level.
It can be holding of pay. It can be your reputation. Just put yourself in that position. You've got lots of money, and you ask the small guy to do something. What can you do to them if they don't do what you say? Those two things are what I came up with here, but What does your boss do to you when, after the fact? Why can they do scope creep? You can implement things like what I talk about in here. You can try to implement some type of system change request system that's significantly painful for them to try to deter them from doing scope creep, but you need enough power to be able to do that. So you need to have enough reputation, all that stuff. Accenture says you got to go through these, jump through these hoops to talk to us, and you already failed with everyone else, and only Accenture wants to deal with your RFP, then you got to deal with them. But if you don't have to deal with them, you don't have to deal with them. So in real life, some people get to do some system change requests. You really only see that within corporate structure. You don't get to see that with the small guys so much.
So the most obvious first thought is that if you demand half pay up front, something like this, then they have something to lose if they don't accommodate your demands, and then you have something to lose if you don't accommodate their demands. Why isn't that sufficient?
The reputation part. So you can go in and say, well, goodbye. And they can also, there's legal action, but also there's the reputation. Again, the contract, the way it's written up, it says stuff like, essentially it says, we can take your money and not do anything. If the contract looks like that, they probably won't sign it. If it looks like we got to do something after you give us half the money, well, now you're on the hook. So this is also in the paper it talks about perfect agreements or perfect contract versus imperfect contract. Perfect contract is kind of an ideal that you can't really obtain within contract theory, within economics. You try to account for all the contingencies. Because there isn't really a perfect contract, you got imperfect contracts. So those, it's like moving goalposts. And remember, if you guys watch Law and Order or whatever you want to watch, I actually don't watch this show, so I use that example. I don't know what goes on in there, but whatever, Perry Mason, I used to watch that. People, attorneys are actually, if we further down in here, there's a description of perversion. Perversion is when you enjoy following the rules, being within the rules, and exploiting people, but within the rules. And if you hear attorneys talk about contracts or what have you, and you see their eyes light up, that, oh, you didn't dot the I across the T, and they kind of enjoy it, and they think it's obvious, but it's not. And that's a thing that it's some of these irrational behaviors. So, and let me talk a little bit about these behaviors, because this is the kind of thing that the irrational behaviors are things that you see as a developer, the programmer, but you see it as any agent or principal. But it's kind of a thing where, again, ethically, you're supposed to assume the best of people, that they are going to behave in a rational manner. But you know that people are human and they don't behave in a rational manner.
Ethically?
Yeah, it's like assume the best of people. When I say assume the best, they're going to behave according to the contract and according to their own best interest, right? So there's a way that they ought to be. I'll say it that way. So instead of saying ethically, like morally from on high, there's a way you ought to act. Like you ought to act rationally, right? Then you can get into altruism and all that. Get all that. There's like a rational ought. There's a way you ought to act. And then you see people not do that. But you're not supposed to bring that kind of thing up or discuss it, so it creates a problem. That in and of itself is a problem. But there's all these behaviors that that account for what I said earlier, work fills the amount of space that's available. So it's not just Johnny Ives wants to create a bigger signal for himself and create a $50,000 single page website. It's also obsessional behavior, hysterical behavior, and perverted behavior. When you see, like I described the attorney earlier, just getting enjoyment from following the rules, getting enjoyment from being in, if you've ever worked at a large corporation or in a government agency, there are people in there that enjoy that there's this massive process and that you don't know what it is and that they know what it is and they enjoy following. It's against everybody's interest in order to have a process that is that inefficient. But they actually derive enjoyment from those rules. That's like a sadism and a masochism. Enjoying making the rule and making you follow it would be like a sadism. Them succumbing to this, Byzantine, labyrinth of rules, that's like a masochism.
I would assume it's just like the joy of being competent at a complex thing. It becomes sufficiently complex, you just enjoy being good at it, even though it's completely arbitrary and useless. That doesn't affect whether you enjoy being good at something.
It would be rational. That would be the case, and it would make it rational, just enjoying. If there wasn't, if you didn't have these other conscious preferences, right? So I said conscious preferences. You consciously want to make more money. Everybody else make more money. Be efficient, all these other things. That's what will come out of your mouth. But subconsciously, you enjoy being good at this.
So is that long-term interest versus short-term interest? I theoretically want what is in my long-term best interest, but in reality, I want whatever creates some kind of visceral pleasure in the moment.
I think you get into an issue where you say in reality it's just conscious versus unconscious. Somebody, like I haven't heard an attorney say, oh, I enjoy being able to follow these rules and you don't know. Like you just see their eyes light up, right? And when these organizations, you see someone who's like a old school project manager and they're just sitting there and you have this great idea and it's like, oh, you can do this in a couple days versus a couple months, and you just see them start smiling. You didn't say, "Mother, may I?"
So right? I kind of wonder if perhaps I might accidentally be stepping across what your proposed South by Southwest talk was, but I'm immediately thinking of somebody who is in love with knowing all of the arcane, vast details of C++. And how, even though they may claim that they want efficiency and they theoretically would agree that they want a language that allows them to be efficient, in reality, they'll probably just enjoy knowing all the nooks and crannies of a language, and they get, what somebody might call Stockholm Syndrome from the outside of loving the abusive language itself.
So you said in reality, but I would say subconsciously. If you don't say subconsciously, then it's just, I don't know what in reality means. All of it is in reality. There's conscious and subconscious. It's both of you. That's how I would do it. Like maybe you mean the more powerful driver of the person is what you said, or something like that. But one of the attributes of it is not conscious. Like they don't want to say it, they don't want to verbalize it or whatever. And then but the conscious side is, oh yeah, I want to dot the I's, cross the T's, efficiencies, all this stuff. It would be an embarrassment for them to stand up there and say, I like the labyrinth. Like that's how you know there's some ideology happening when nobody wants to admit what's going down. So let me say some of these other things because they're even more controversial. So, you guys can read in here if you want, but the obsessional behavior, I'm just shortening it because we're getting a bit long. Obsessional behavior, they enjoy being careful. Obsessional behavior is somebody who's what you just said with the C++. But in the over-architect, I enjoy maybe somebody that wants to be an alarmist with security, somebody that wants to do, you know, premature optimization, all these other things. Remember, when they see the space, if they know that something's due, let's say just in one sprint, something's due next Thursday, and then if they're the obsessional type, right, you know, and it's Monday, they're working on all of those other things that kind of forestall next Thursday from happening. They enjoy working on the things like premature optimization. They enjoy making things more elegant. They enjoy, on the UX side, they enjoy, well, I'm going to go out and read about the latest information on how to hook a user within the user experience. And then the principal. What features can I throw at you even though I just finished giving you a priority list yesterday? Here's some new ones because I just dreamed about them last night. How long does it take to do them, by the way? Tell me right now, for free. You know, that, all from all sides. They're always doing it, and that's an obsessional behavior. Hysterical behavior is, like they say, they enjoy exploring. So it's not about being careful and forestalling stuff, but it's about seeking new things. Very close. They're kind of they're described as two sides of the same coin. Obsessional and hysterical. But obsessional is they don't want next Thursday to come, and they don't want the final reconciliation to come. So they create all these things that are actually too much work. They kind of do work in order to do nothing. Okay? But the hysterical person will constantly find new things. It's not good enough. It's not good enough. It's not good enough. It's not good enough. And then we already talked about the birds, somebody who's like, that's a large contract thing. But those behaviors all work against what you consciously want to do, which is just get the job done. Just be efficient and all that stuff. So what do you guys think?
Well, to me, it almost feels like it's that all those different things kind of boil down to, you know, wanting to win the game, and you kind of lose track of it. It's almost like, you know, you kind of fall down into whatever your particular game is, and it's more of a, you know, it gets down into the tactics and stuff, and you think that you're winning, and you think that you are accomplishing your goals because your goals are kind of changing to this new thing where you say, oh, well, if I master this complexity, I'm winning. I'm actually achieving the goal. And, you know, you kind of rationalize that to be that you're actually doing what you originally said you were going to be, but you know, it really comes down to, oh, well, I really love working within this constrained system and finding a solution, which, you know, I'm working within the rules or all these, you know, self-imposed engineering limits that aren't real or whatever. So it almost is like that you're, I don't know if it's, you know, it's almost like a, you know, the conscious subconscious distinction. I don't know if it's more of a gray thing, but it's kind of that you're able to kind of slide down the slope to be in a different game than you think you are. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think that it makes sense that there's a different set of preferences down that slope you're talking about, and you're trying to play with those. And those preferences, if you were to try to announce them, you'd be embarrassed.
Right, like shell scripting, you know, or C++ was another good example. I have personal experience with both, but you know, years ago, I felt really cool when I could figure out some crazy way to do some kind of C++ template metaprogramming or whatever, and it was atrocious, and it was much harder than other things. But you solved the problem, you know, and you forget about the fact that the problem was to come up with a simple solution, because the problem became, I have to solve this using this neat thing that I can use.
sounds more like a mechanism of justification, perhaps.
Well, it's I kind of have a view that whether things are rational, it's kind of a wishy-washy thing, but that we're goal seekers, we're kind of by evolutionary means, we're trying to survive, and our brains are adapted to solve problems in order to do that, and and things can kind of get off track to where our goal-seeking algorithms are firing, and you're doing things for that for this new kind of how to phrase it, I guess it's that it's easier to lose track of what goal you're trying to solve than to
Yeah, I mean, if you think lizard brain versus other kinds, people tend to agree that your goals for your lizard are different than your conscious or what have you, so they will go along the lines of what you're saying. So I think we're going pretty long, and this is a long paper, but this is also a thing that we always argue over. So this next portion talks about the end game, and I think for programmers, I think this is Principal Agent is one game that everybody should be familiar with if you're going to use game theory or try to think of any type of model between two people, how to deal with it. Or when I say should, other people that know about that have an advantage over you when you don't know about it. That's why you should know about the Principal Agent. So it allows you to sit back and think about that problem. And the end game is another one. This is one where if you don't think about it, it's counterintuitive, but it's backwards induction. I will let you read through this, but basically, no, actually, I'm gonna read through this as fast as I can. I'm gonna describe this because this is what happens within software. Endgame, we're going to illustrate endgame as a card game in which there are two decks of cards, one black deck and one red deck. One student, Adam, has a black deck of cards, and 26 other students have one red card. If a player hands in a pair of cards, one black and one red, they get $100. No player may get together and collectively bargain. They may bargain only with Adam. There is also a set time to turn in the cards. Okay. So if you think about that, it's like, okay, this guy has all the cards, literally. And if I go with him, he can tell me, he's got a black card, I got a red card, we negotiate about this $100. Now, at first glance, it seems that Adam can end up offering you a small price, say $20. So that's only 20% of the 100. They give you $20 for your red card and keep $80 for himself, leaving you with little room to negotiate. Because he can just turn around. If you try to negotiate with Adam, he can just stop negotiating with you and move on to someone else who will accept his terms. But if you wait until all the other players have already exchanged their cards with Adam, his only option becomes to trade with you for the last card or lose $100. At that point, you can require a 50-50 split, and you're in a stronger negotiation position. Now, on top of that, whoever else waits until the time requirement approaches will also be able to negotiate with that same position. There's just a bunch of people who can say, all right, 50-50 split or not. Now, there's some things within game theory, utility function, all that. Let's just say that Adam cares about $100.
Okay, but I mean, don't you immediately run to an equivalent problem to the prisoner's dilemma, where since none of the other players can negotiate with each other, they don't know that the other players aren't just going to compromise and accept a lesser amount. And so if that one person accepts it, the next person down the line, they don't know that everybody else is going to reject along, though they would have had to have coordinated to know that, or believe that all other players are going to act rationally, which is the fundamental problem of the prisoner's dilemma, is that you don't know if the other person will act rationally.
So the solution to the prisoner's dilemma and to what you're saying is with this guy named Thomas Schelling, got a Nobel Prize for, which is Schelling points or focal points. So you don't have to communicate to somebody else in order to agree. So what ends up happening is if a bunch of people just don't, you can decide on your own just to wait to the last second. An obsessional person would probably do that. You know, they're just going to have anxiety and they don't want to negotiate, and they just naturally will just wait to the end. And they just come at the last second. And remember, Adam wants them. You know, he wants to get the money, right? It's not just like $100 or $50 and it like a penny to him. It's, you know, he wants to do it. He's a student, college, so he wants to maximize his money, right? So he knows it's the time. It's the clock is ticking. You got a minute left, and then now you got 10 people to negotiate with, and you got 10 black cards. You're going to be out of $1,000 unless you start saying, okay, right? And they don't have to talk to each other. Same thing with the prisoner's dilemma is, you know, people just say, naturally just say, I'm not going to talk. That happens, you know, in real life. So,
on the contrary, most people naturally talk when they shouldn't, and they give up their advantageous position for terrible reasons all the time.
Within certain cultures.
Well, I don't know.
the people that end up going to jail a lot end up not adopting that behavior. So it ends up happening to where, you know, even if you may not ever have been in that situation before, you may adopt a position where it's like, I'm not supposed to talk because I know that's the best thing to do, even though I've never talked to that other person or whatever. It can evolve. It can happen, even though you've never played the game before.
Doesn't it really come down to risk tolerance?
Risk tolerance.
I mean, if the cop is telling me that, you know, if I just talk, I can guarantee I'd only get 1/4 as bad a punishment as I'll get if I don't talk, but my partner does, then I decide, well, you know, geez, you know, I'm willing to take that risk versus like, no, I'm not willing to take that risk.
Not only, it can come down to risk tolerance, but I think in real life it comes down to actually, I mean, people actually behaving, they hear that and they know rationally they should, but they're irrational and they say no because of whether like culture or they're just taught not to talk. So even though consciously it's rational, they just say no. And then what's funny is that the paradox there is that it actually is rational for them not to talk. So
I don't know. You're assuming that the irrational behavior is the rational behavior. In this case, I'm assuming the irrational behavior would be the opposite of the rational behavior.
The focal point is one solution for the prisoner's dilemma. So endgame wise, that's a description of endgame. In software, what happens? Principals start withholding pay. Agents pause the work. This is what ends up happening when the rubber meets the road. The argument in this paper is that is really the motivator for people to stop exploring, stop playing whatever games you're playing and all these other things, and actually get work done.
So I feel like there's another dynamic going on here and another illustration of it, and that's like the economy at large, which is that employees accept a much lower percentage of the value they create than they should, and like unions attempt to try and negotiate that rate higher. But individuals, in theory, they could all just say no until they get a satisfactory, reasonable percentage of the value they create. Instead, they accept, you know, stagnant wages and things that are quite low that drive the market down. And another factor that comes into play is that, in general, the principal in a capitalistic society has the capital and can afford to wait it out longer. In other words, his timer is different than the timer of the agents. And so it doesn't hurt him as much to spend longer waiting, and eventually somebody gets hungry and says, fine, I'll take a reduced rate.
Yeah, so when you're describing, in your situation you described, you're talking about principle, and then and it's an end player game, are we talking about collective bargaining. So that would be principal versus agent as a collective entity. And so you said labor unions, whatever, they accept a bunch of money, dues. So if they go on strike, they can all still get paid, and all these other games that they can play with the collective bargaining. Or they're not part of a union, they're not doing collective bargaining, they're individual agents and all that stuff. GE, did a good job in making sure that they didn't unionize and all that in the factory, and so they're all individuals. Yeah, they're gonna be not in a good position. But in software, we don't do unions and all these things like that. So I don't know how much it may apply, but
well, I just bring that up as an example of the fact that that would be an example, like an attempt to answer the problems I was bringing up, is that the other players other than Adam try and communicate with each other. That'd be an example of a union.
Yeah.
But in general, they don't. In our society, unions aren't very popular, and they're only becoming less popular, unfortunately.
Right.
And as a result, you have all these people not talking to each other. That accurately mimics it, and one of them gets hungry, right? Yeah. And they all generally end up accepting lower rates than they should because they don't talk to each other. They don't know better.
Yeah. Living in game theory, it's a coordination cost to talk to each other. It's not free for a bunch of people to talk. It can happen, though. People can do it.
Last door, I guess.
Well, it's certainly been happening. There's been, the whole thing with, people openly talking about salaries.
Yes.
In the last couple of years.
Yep. Like Google with the collusion with Apple and all this stuff like that. It's kind of like we've got to get a beating in order to just say a little tiny bit about this type of stuff. And it's kind of, for me, it's one of the reasons why I'm interested in game theory is the principals, executives, or the strategic, the capitalists, whatever, are inundated with strategy and how to make decisions that take into account other people's decisions. But as labor, we kind of, something happened where one side, we kind of don't think that it works. And on the other side, you get exploited, and you wonder, how did you get exploited? Or it's not fair. Like, well, they're using these concepts that you're not taught as labor or as an agent. It's totally fair for both sides to have the same, weapons. So it's amazing to me. And I don't know if you guys can tell me if it's that complicated, just that one portion up there where it talks about the principal agent.
I mean, it seems super straightforward, but of course, you naturally see the effect where one side tries to hide disadvantageous to know information from the other party, convince them they shouldn't know it, convince them it's immoral to know it or to use it, etc., in order to gain a competitive advantage, and so they try and game the game.
Yeah, that's correct. So. Be grateful. Right. You should be grateful that you have a job.
And you're very bad if you don't.
Yes, immoral. So to try to breeze through the last portions of this, as far as adjustments, the principal always has really both sides, but the principal always has the advantage to be a hard negotiator at the end of the project. So, depending on what your negotiation position is during that end game, so like that 70% mark or 80% mark, and really it's an illustration of whether in software you've got most of the work done or whatever, and you get to that 90% mark or 80% mark, and then that last portion takes all the time. Everything else, you got most of it done. It was simple. You could have did it from the beginning and got most of it done. But that last portion takes most of the time, bugs, whatever. That's kind of like what the end game is. You get to negotiate, but it's about negotiation position. And the main point, again, with the paper is negotiation position is what dictates the estimation. how good of a negotiator you are when you get to the end game, that's what you should put into your estimation. It's not how long you take and all these other things. Because all the other stuff, the irrational behaviors, when you're talking about a group of people are going to be irrational. The rational behaviors, we've seen that people rationally want to fill up the space that's available from an estimation. You still are, so that behavior is going to happen no matter what, rational, irrational. You're going to be in a position where the principal did the scope creep, you did the over-architecture, you did all these other things. Now it's time for negotiation position. How good of a negotiating position are you in and negotiator? Now your estimate needs to take that into account.
Maybe jumping back a little bit, but maybe I didn't catch, were you saying that the desire to over-architect represents a rational desire by the agent to fill in the space?
So, I mean, we can go back up there, but it's the
rational or irrational to want to fill up the space over-architecting by the agent?
The word over-architect or phrase, that's problematic, but if you are Johnny Ives and you want to create a bigger signal for yourself because you don't work on crap, then, right, in that situation, that's where I'm talking about it's rational. It's to his own benefit to do it. It's not to the principal's benefit, or it could be, it could be the principal's benefit. They just don't think it is. So that's where all these behaviors, where it gets complicated, is it could be all rational behavior, like people acting in their own best interest, and it still fills up the spot. It fills up the gap. But I would say that even with risky projects, the behavior is like this. People will see if it's a sprint, if it's 3 months, if it's a year, whatever, they will explore. One behavior is they'll explore, if they're good, the best option. Like that is a thing. Like try to figure out what's the best way to do. There's could be 10 different ways. Look at all of them. And they're going to do that, and what stops them from doing that is the end game. So that's filling up the space. That's one behavior of filling up the space where it's rational. Like that's what you're supposed to do. You know, like people will behave that way. It's in their best interest when I say it's rational. So there's that. I'm going to skip over all the stuff because progression, you know, we got traditional estimation. You can read about that. You got distributed. You got decentralized. Everybody says here's some points, whatever, and you play a game there, try to figure out what the hours are. And then distributed, that portion there is talking about maybe some ideas on where you can have people create estimates based off of something that essentially is not an estimate. It's essentially, it takes away the random part of the principal can't say, no, I don't want that. If you make this thing, it becomes a perfect contract. If you make some code and use smart contracts within Bitcoin, and then you do some type of thing where it's when it has like quality of service, so microservices. Let's say you wrote, you wrote it in Go, and you said, I'm going to guarantee 2,000 hits per second, and here's the contract. Like here's what the API looks like. This, and this. Build that into the smart contract in Bitcoin, whatever. As soon as it goes out there, smart contract tests it, whatever, the money is released to you. But at that point, you put that proposal out there, and then the principal says, yep, I want that. Right? So you have incentive to make this small thing so you minimize your risk, but it's all inclusive. So you have incentive to make a perfect contract. The principal sees this stuff and they're like, yes, yes, yes. You can do better because you can see what contracts are out there that have been fulfilled for your integration. So that could be something where it's a distributed, so it's pushed down and it isn't so much like central. It isn't centralized like traditional. It isn't even decentralized where it's kind of a bunch of little hierarchies. I don't know. This is just one example of it here. So the trick is somebody else it has to be irrevocable. It has to be an irrevocable contract.
Yeah, it sounds like there's some test, some concrete condition you can fulfill that is then out of their hands. They've placed a proxy that they can't control.
Yep, and the court can't control it either. This goes that far.
I suppose trying to think of like how you could do it for UI. I mean, you have to have users, but assuming that it's something that's actually being used, you could have some type of metrics on users. Maybe like you can guarantee some level of engagement, length of time people would be on the site, or percentage of users that will bounce or debounce, and you could assume that you could manipulate those numbers by having quality UI or UX, and then within X period of time, or you keep working on it until you get those numbers high enough, and then automatically you get paid as soon as it's reached a sufficient level and actually hit those tests.
That last part is the part. How does it get done? If you can make it where it's a smart contract where it's out of the hand of the principal saying, yeah, because that's where the game is. The part of it is the principals. Well,
right. So I mean,
said 100, but
yeah. So the test is something that, I mean, you obviously have some metrics that are being tracked, and it's just evaluating the metrics that are being output, right? And so those metrics are being concretely spit out somewhere, and then the test is the evaluation of those metrics.
If you have an arbitrator, so let's just say an attorney, and now it's not in their hands. Yes, just have an arbitrator that looks at it and says, looks like there was 100 people, whatever, they're getting paid now, and it was in escrow. Yeah, sure, bad.
Why does it have to be somebody who looks at it and says there was 100, and can it be an automated evaluation that says, yes, 100 were reported to have gone through, and you just agree on what that was?
Okay. Well, so I see what you're saying. Yeah, something like that. Yeah. You could game that, but something like that is where you want to go. Something like that is where you want to go. I don't care. I like the back end part. I don't freaking care about. We solve that problem. We get there. So that's it. You guys have anything else? Otherwise, we went pretty long, but this is a hard topic, so. Yeah, well, the conclusion is just it revisits the idea that the estimate is a limit. It's not a straightforward. One way to look at estimate is just I gave you how long it is, whatever. The other way is there's an internal contradiction inside of it. There's some type of ambiguity inside of it that makes us behave in all types of weird ways when we put the estimate out there. The estimate itself has an effect. When you saying the number affects how people are going to behave or react to the number. They adjust to your number. So they fill up the spot and all that stuff. The point is, saying that that's not the case, that's disavowal. That's saying now you're repressing it. Now you're causing the problem. We need to make it to where we critique that explicitly. You have it to where throughout the whole project, you try to make it to where you have this very explicit demonstration of who all has made their changes or who all is over-architecting or whatever, but just all the changes that are happening throughout the project, try to make it explicit. And then also try to get to some type of whatever way you can get to that negotiation position. Maybe it's through having a whole bunch of overbuilt work that you now present at the end of the project and say, well, when they say, you didn't do all this, and then you kind of predicted what they were going to say or what all needed to be done, right? And then you say, well, I knew that you wanted that. Okay. But you don't, maybe you don't even say that. You just say, okay, we'll work on that. And you come back 2 weeks later, oh, here you got for free, even though it's already done. So that kind of, whatever it is that you can do, that would be sandbagging, but whatever it is that you can do, negotiation position is what the estimate is all about. So there you go. All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Take it
Thank
easy,
you.
guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
No.
Well, we got 2 guest speakers.
Yeah, the guest speakers will probably be the topic for next time.